Welcome back to Mi Valle, Mi Vida. I'm Ariana Luna.
And I'm Juan Carmona. And sitting between us here is Miss Taylor Seaver. She's kind of been our, like a social media person. If you ever see posts out there, she's the one doing. She's been helping us out a lot. And today she's going to help us out even more. What we decided to do is do a video of us introducing ourselves so we can reconnect with our audience. We talk about ourselves in the podcast, but we don't go that deep into who we are. And so what I'm going to have Taylor do today is ask us some questions so you guys can get to know us a little bit better and what drives us to do this podcast. So I'll let Taylor go ahead and get started.
Okay, so to start off, Ariana, could you give us your background and what would you like your audience to know about you?
Okay, so I'm Ariana Luna. I'm from Donna, Texas. And I currently teach at Donna Early College High School here in Donna. And I graduated from RGV with a bachelor's in history and a bachelor's in Mexican studies. So what we talk about is what I study, and I'm fully immersed in it. I'm currently going to UTRGV still for my master's in interdisciplinary studies with a focus in history. So I'm still studying it, and it's just really being in school, getting my master's, but also just being from the Valley and just having this background, this really, really rich background in the Valley and Mexican studies just really drives me to just contribute to this podcast a lot. Like, I love it, and this is my passion, yeah.
And Juan, what's your background?
I'm also a teacher at Donna High School. I am a dual enrollment instructor for South Texas College. I teach U.S. history for dual enrollment, Mexican American history for dual enrollment. In fact, Ariana was in my first Mexican American history class here at Donna High School. And it's really interesting to now work with her, not just in this podcast, but as a coworker here at the district. I'm very passionate about Mexican American studies. I testified in Austin several times to get it into our high schools, not just as dual enrollment, but as a regular high school class. I love, guiding students to learn about their history, their culture, their background. I'm also the author of The Alton Bus Crash. And currently, me and my students just finished a podcast about an Alamo train crash in Alamo in 1940, which killed 34 farm workers. And I'm looking to turn that into a book as well. And one thing I really want my listeners to know about is just how much I love Valley history and how rich it is, and how it is a unique place in the world with a conglomeration of all kinds of peoples, Native, Mexican, Spanish, Anglo, and then more so where, Middle Eastern people are moving here. So it's becoming a very diverse region, as it always has been from its inception. So it's something that a lot of people take for granted or don't really think about. They're like, oh, there's no history here, but this place has a rich history, which is kind of what drives me to do this podcast.
So how did this idea come about?
It actually started, which is funny that we're doing this video. It was going to start as a YouTube channel, but just to be honest, I just could not learn the video editing software, and so I decided to. And it was at the same time I was getting into podcasts, because I found that I could, be cleaning or doing other things. Although I love to learn, and I watch documentaries and stuff, but I can't be, I always want to be learning. So if I can't read a book or watch a video because I'm cleaning or doing something outside, podcasts are perfect. And so I was getting into them, and I was like, well, I think maybe I can handle audio editing software, which apparently I can. And so that kind of shifted it from the video to the podcast that you hear now.
And Ariana, what was your contribution to the idea?
So it actually also came about because we were doing work on the side, and we would meet at coffee time like 2 summers ago, I believe. And, this was also around the time where a lot of negative conversations were popping up in the news about the Valley. How it's full of criminals and violence, and it's a war zone, and all this just really negative stuff that was also very wrong. Like, it's not a war zone here in the Valley. And so us being educators, I was not an educator at that time, but also just like my passion and want to inform people of correct history, but also correct information of how we actually are in the Valley, coupled with the podcast and interest and YouTube interest, right? it just meshed together and say, hey, why don't we just do like a YouTube channel, which then turned into a podcast of just informing everyone. It doesn't necessarily have to be other scholars or other teachers or other people in the Valley, but like for everyone in the country, like whoever could find our podcast, like, hey, this is what the Valley actually is like, and here's 2 people from the Valley talking about it. So that was also part of it.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to add is I've always felt as historians, we should be producing material for everybody, not just for like 10 people in 10 other historians that'll understand all this theory and stuff. History's, the history of our people, and it should be easily accessible to our people. And I feel that's actually the job of a historian, is to preserve and give back to the community their stories. And this is one way of doing it.
And what is the goal or the main goal that you'd like to accomplish with this podcast?
For me, it's just, especially as an educator, but, just to, inform people about our rich history. Even people that live here don't even, I'm a scholar of the border, and I still find things that I never knew about. And I think other people would like to hear those stories. Good stories, bad stories, but just our stories. Humans, are very complicated people with all kinds of stories, and the Valley is no different. But the fact that it's like an international border places it also on the international stage. A lot of people don't really recognize it as such. So, we live in a very important, vibrant area.
And Ariana, is there a specific goal that you'd like to accomplish with the podcast?
My main goal for this podcast is just to get the correct information out there, because I hate how the Valley is painted in the news or media or social media, just this one-sided view. And the main goal for me is just information, like put the information out there, whether that be history or our day-to-day lives or our needs and our wants. We need stuff, policy, we need resources, we need just our voices to be heard. That's just one part of the podcast that I think is very, very important to me, because that's information, and education in general is just very, very important to me. And if our podcast can reach one person and that person can say, oh, I learned something new today. Did you know this about this little region in Texas? Then I think our goal is like accomplished tenfold.
Yeah, and I was just realizing I was hearing you talk is obviously there's a huge age difference. So having 2 different, that more perspective of what's going on. Like when we talk about, how the media portrays this place as violent and dangerous, I always point out to my students and even Ariana that when I grew up here in the 80s, the crime rate was much higher. And you didn't hear it described as a war zone or anything. The crime rate is actually really low here. But that's not the image that's portrayed to the rest of the world. I remember seeing an interview of, I think it was a reporter who was actually wearing a bulletproof vest by the border, and we were just laughing like, what do you? And he was literally standing in front of the wall, which is even funnier because I guess the wall didn't protect us enough. Yeah. So you still need a bulletproof vest. But it's just the extreme contrasts of like what they're showing, and then like day to day, like we don't feel like we live in an unsafe area. I know there's bigger cities have much higher crime rates than here, and so like I don't feel scared going anywhere.
Yeah. And what would you say your favorite episodes are?
For sure, the episode about barbecues, and it's not just we've done it, and we're actually coming up with. We have another episode that involves food. Yes, we love food, but what it really, honestly, barbecues for me were my Mexican American studies. And it was nice to share that because that's where I learned my history. We didn't have this kind of class when I went to school. So I learned my history when my uncles and my grandparents would get together, and I would just, like I was a professional eavesdropper, I would just listen to their stories. My dad and uncles all served in Vietnam, and they would never tell you flat out what happened. But I found if, once they got together, I could listen in and I would hear my history. So, that was to me a very crucial part of growing up in my own personal education.
And what about you, Ariana?
I would also say the barbecue podcast was a favorite of mine. And then definitely the snack one. The snack one was super tasty. But also for just personal reasons for me, the one where we talk about barbecues and COVID.
Yeah.
And how COVID affected us as a community. It kind of sent a ripple throughout our community here in the RGV because we're very, very family oriented down here. Barbecues are pretty much just every week things, right? And we also acknowledge in that podcast about how COVID kind of broke that apart. And for some families like mine, barbecues will never be the same because we lost family members over the year. So I think that episode, we really got really personal with whoever our listeners were, because it was that kind of shared experience, shared pain also sometimes that just allowed us to get, on a personal level. Like, we're not just people who make a podcast. We're also Valley residents who experienced the first wave and the second wave and all the aftermath after that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think it got really personal for both of us, for that, because I did lose a family member as well. And, like I said, that's my history, but it was also the shared experience that we were all going through at that time.
And what are some future ideas for this podcast?
One I've been wanting to do, but COVID kept me from doing it, is I wanted to do one about flea markets, especially the one in Alamo. Oh my God, that place it's always super crowded, which is why COVID kept me away. But soon we'll do that. And also think about like the amount of people that cross the border to go to the doctor, to go get medications. That's another thing that people from outside of the Valley don't really know a lot about. We always talk about how wonderful our healthcare system, which is not. And then the very fact is that people come Winter Texans, all these people come here because they go to the doctor, they go to the dentist, they go get their prescriptions in Mexico. And too often we're like, Mexico is like backwards and all this stuff, which is not. And that's one example. It's like, we can go get our healthcare there.
Definitely more food episodes. Yeah, definitely more food episodes. The one that's going to come out right now, we went to like a couple places. Man, that was some good food. And not just like any food in the Valley. We explored different ethnic foods. And what the Valley has is surprising. So,
Yeah.
and then also more of the ancient history here too.
Oh, yeah.
That's something that we really want to dig into also, because we talk a lot about, Mexican Revolution, immigration, stuff like that. But what was here before we were here too?
Yeah.
So I think that's something else we should dig into.
Yeah, that's something, I'm looking forward to doing, taking a drive out to like Starr County and stuff and look at the geography. We're actually our goal is to try this summer to shoot quite a few of them, because we want to get back to releasing one a month. But like with teaching and just the craziness of online learning, it's been overwhelming for us. But we plan to get a couple of them actually done before school starts, and that way we'll have some cushion to shoot some more. I'll definitely do a podcast about my book around September, which is the anniversary of the bus crash. There's plenty more. Like I said, this is a rich area with lots of history, so there's plenty more topics to go.
And overall, where do y'all see this going?
I hope it reaches people beyond the Valley. I know most of our listeners are in the Valley, and like I said, it's a good education. A lot of us don't know our own history, and that's good, and I would love everyone to listen to it, but I would love other people from outside of the Valley, the rest of the state and the country, to really pick up on it, and just to get, like I said, like she's been saying as well, get a better view of the Valley, a more complete view.
And Ariana?
I totally agree that I hope people not just from the Valley listen to it. Like, I think a lot of the misconception that happens around the country stems from the fact that sometimes we don't even know our own history. We don't know who we are sometimes, so we can't properly inform other people who are not from the Valley about what's actually going on here. So, the education part of it is just the thing that I wanted to go forward, to drive it forward, because informing people here, it's like, oh wow, I didn't know that about us. I didn't know that happened here. I didn't know about this that happened over there. And now you can tell someone who says, hey, isn't it violent down at the border? And that person can say no, because actually it's like this. Yeah. And so I think that's where I wanted to go, for me at least, that just to debunk all that stuff that's flying around on Twitter and Facebook, and you see a bunch of that stuff on there, and it really, like, I'm just one person, and I'm gonna drive myself crazy trying to try and tell everyone. But if us here in the Valley know, then all of us can help debunk all that stuff.
Is there anything you'd like to add?
Just that I hope we serve our purpose of informing our listeners. And honestly, if you can comment, send emails. We'll have her. We'll put our information on the video in case you guys have ideas or stories that you'd like to share. We could interview you for a podcast and a story.
I agree. I hope this goes far. I hope just you guys enjoy the podcast. That's the main goal also, that you enjoy it. Not just like the information part of it, that it's enjoyable, and that when you listen to a podcast, say, hey, I remember something about this, or yeah, I've heard of that folk tale, or I relate to this barbecue episode, and stuff like that. So I hope we're enjoyable but also relatable. So yeah.
Well, thank you guys for watching our video, and hopefully you tune into our podcast.
Thank you.
Thank
you.